it's a real pleasure to be here. I tried to go around the room and see whether or not I could answer some of the questions to put them in my talk. I got so many different responses, but I've changed my talk already. This is one of the good things about a PowerPoint. I hope it goes up there. Oh my goodness. Well, actually, I have to show you one thing. I tried to get a tablet up here, but then I decided, no, I want a book to stay. So just know that that was one of the questions, and I do have quite a few opinions about books that won't be said today. But I will begin by how I began my book, Proust and the Squid, but I want you to know that, as one of you said, please, I'm an English major, and I want you to know I am too. I met this morning with my breakfast group that consists of Gish, Jen, Allegra Goodman, Maryanne Thompson, all these wonderful novelists and architects, and Naomi Pierce, who was one of your speakers on Lepidoptera a few years ago. Those of you who might remember her on her butterfly lecture. But I want to begin with Marilynne Robinson, because she said something that really helped me when I was both writing my book and actually choosing the slides for you. Because all of us, in some ways, are transcultural. We are both women of science and women of literature. And that's really what today is about in this talk. And Marilynne said something through an elderly curate that I thought was so beautiful about how he wrote sermons. I wrote almost all of it in the deepest hope and conviction, sifting my thoughts and choosing my words, trying to say what was true. And I'll tell you frankly, that was wonderful. Choosing my slides for you, an audience of so many different avocations, vocations, and goals, was in its own way a loving task. And I didn't expect it to be like that. I thought, it's another talk. It's not. We who will try to change science and literature for ourselves and our next generation of women. This is a very important and meaningful thing. Now, this is the slide that no one ever reads, but I do it every time because I want you to realize just for 1 minute the range of work that goes into the study of reading. Now, many, many people just take this for granted. No one in this room, of course. But I want you to realize, just the tiniest bit about what, in fact, goes into the study of reading. Linguistics, genetic research. We're working right now to understand the genetics of African American children and Hispanic, because so much of our genetic research has been on Caucasian. Music. Some of you were talking to me about children who are being diagnosed at 3 with various issues that may lead to dyslexia. Part of our work is to understand the genetics of dyslexia so that at 3 years of age, we can go in and do interventions that have never been tried before, in part because some of our basic science is going into the tiny aspects of music that are related to the tiny aspects of reading. And what are we finding? What do you think is one of the most important aspects of music that actually is very related to the phonemes in our language? What do you think? What aspect of music? Rhythm. Who said rhythm? Oh, Maryanne, she's so smart. Maryanne, I just learned. You can't believe this. Her father taught my teacher, Norman Geschwin. I was like, unbelievable. I just, all this. Anyway, music, the rhythmic aspect, is one of the very important aspects that also has relationship to reading. Now, most of you would never realize this, but maybe you could do one thing for me and think about how often music is deleted from our curricula, because it's one of the first things to go. We studied 2 classrooms. Kathy Moritz did this work and found that those children who had gotten music every day in kindergarten, the Kadai method, were ahead of children who were totally matched in every other way, but had received your normal 20 minutes a week. They were ahead in various aspects of reading at the end of 1st grade. These are the sorts of things we want to understand and we want to put in our early intervention. Lynn Miller, who sits right here, I have to say, people always say, oh, you couldn't do your work without so-and-so. This is the absolute truth. May I say it to every person here. I could never have done my work without Lynn Tomer Miller. So please. It's just true. It's just true. Now, we're working on semantic development, which I won't tell you a thing about, but I will tell you later about global literacy in just a minute. We're working on brain imaging always in our study of dyslexia. We are always involved in what are some of the differences. Why do so many fourth graders fail? Why do so many fourth graders who are African American fail to become good readers? We want to understand potential linguistic dialect differences, and we're working on that. Now, I'm only going to say two things about this slide because my colleagues are right over there. John Gabrielli at MIT Brain Imaging, and right here. Where is my dear Cynthia Brazil, who is your lecturer? Where are you, Cynthia? There she is. I will have a better picture of her later. Tune in a few minutes. Who would imagine that I would be working with a roboticist? I mean, it's so interesting. I feel, but you will hear more about that. Now, why Proust? For goodness sakes, what kind of a title is Proust and the Squid? Maryanne knows the squid. I wasn't going to say where, but I'm going to say it now. But Proust, I want to almost bring you into the heart of reading. And Proust, more than any neuroscientist, educator, or linguist, said what I believe is at the heart of reading. We feel quite truly that our wisdom begins where that of the author ends. By a law which says we can receive the truth from nobody, that which is the end of their wisdom appears to us but the beginning of ours. This is the heart. And very seriously, this is what I want for all children. All children. Children with challenges, children with no challenges. Children who live in African villages that are so remote they've never seen a cell phone. We want the experience that every single person in here has, the reading life. Because the reading life is the platform for our most novel and creative thought. It's what connects us to what occurs next in each generation. So Proust is the beating heart in a way of some of my work, but Maryanne, I have to tell you why squid. Now, she's the only one in the room, maybe, who had people talk about squids at her kitchen table. But you see, in the 50s, the squid was used to teach about the long, beautiful neuron. You could understand the central nervous system quite well because of that. Now, we don't use the squid to that extent now, but cognitive neuroscientists, which is what our group is, cognitive neuroscientists look to reading and math to study how the brain learns something new, something that was never there. There is no reading center. There's no reading gene. We will talk a little bit more about that. But because it's a new cultural invention and because we create new circuitry for it, we can study how you acquire reading and at the same time understand how the brain learns new things. Well, in this talk, I have 30 minutes to take you through 30 years of research. So, 1 minute is to the evolution of the reading brain. No, 2. I had not intended to speak too much about dyslexia, but I am going to, because as I went around, what I realized is so many of you have children, grandchildren, friends who are touched by this extraordinary brain. And there's one thing I'm going to say, because I'll forget it when I get there, and that is a term that I want everyone in this room to know. Cerebrodiversity. Cerebrodiversity. This means we evolutionarily have brains that have differences in their organization for a reason. Now, how long ago did we learn to read? A blink of the evolutionary eye. We weren't born to read. And that brain of the dyslexic has been here long before we ever, 6,000 years ago, really began seriously to read. Why was it there then? Why is it there now? And why is its ascendancy probably in this century? Those of you who understand the term cerebral diversity means that organization is there for a reason. I won't talk very much about it, but the right hemisphere of that brain, and we can't speak about every child and never will ever do such a thing, but by and large, we are beginning to understand all the reasons why artists, architects, entrepreneurs, so many people who think outside the box, so many astronomers who are looking at the huge patterns have a history, a childhood history of dyslexia. You do not realize that 30 to 35% of the entrepreneurs today have a history of dyslexia. Your retirement funds. Now, the unbelievable aspect of this for me is that we have been misdiagnosing, misunderstanding, and misteaching children who possess one of our best brains. Any of you who have children, grandchildren, or who yourself, 10% of you, I don't care where I go, 10% of you, 5 to 10% of you, have some aspect that's on that continuum. That is something to celebrate and not to weep over as we have in the past. So, okay, I said I was going to say something and I did it. Wasn't going to, now I am. Okay, so now how does this knowledge change our whole way of doing intervention? And I will speak just about 5 minutes about how we take knowledge from our understanding of the reading brain and bring it to children in intervention. I'll speak only a few minutes at the very end about the digital reading brain, and I will end with our discussion of how we all actually have a role to play in global literacy. Now, how in the world did we ever learn to read if we don't have any genes, if we don't have a center? We are recyclers. We are great recyclers. And literally, who are you? Sabra, a beautiful name and a beautiful brain. Now, back here, Sabra, I wish I could really do this right, but I can't. But Sabra, if I would just put a P right here, she would be activating an area right there and here. Why? Because she is representing information she knows. If I just say, see a P, you, in your mind, will activate an area even though you don't see a thing. But with a P, you're also activating other areas. You're activating objects, and you are activating a little excremental something we will not mention, okay? Now, if you aren't coming with me quickly, you are going to miss a lot of this talk. So move fast. I have to. Okay, so basically what Sabra is doing is activating an area. Now, if she was actually seeing PEA, you would have a word that would activate all kinds of areas that are linguistically firing and telling her all this information. The reality is that first area after the visual information gets there is a recycled area from our object recognition areas. In other words, we are making letters, symbols, and using them in the same way that we recognize objects. And then we actually create an entire circuit. And part of my job usually is to take you through the building of that circuit. We don't have that time today, but the reality is that's what we do. We recycle parts and we make an entirely new circuitry. Now, the circuitry of our brain as an alphabet reader has certain areas, but those are quite different from the areas that we would use if we are a Chinese reader or a Japanese kanji reader. And a Japanese kana system is different still. Look at this. What do you see immediately? That right hemisphere is so much more represented than our alphabet. Why? Why? Pictorial. How many symbols do you have to have as a 5th grader? 5,000. And we are, we're always complaining and whining about 26 measly letters. Give us anyway, the whole point is that a writing system changes us. It changes the circuit. This is one of the most beautiful brains to the way that this is being used. And Japanese use 3 different writing systems, basically 2, but 3 different ones by the time they're 5th grade. In other words, the brain rearranges itself in different ways to read according to the writing system. And if I have time, I will suggest, don't you think he's reading, because he's not. This is usually what I do to cue myself that some of you, a few of you, I hope almost none of you, and maybe please none of you, saw me on the Today program in November in which they interviewed me about Teach Your Baby to Read. And I lost it. My entire professional demeanor was in place for 58 minutes. And then 59th minute, he said, what about all the research they have? And then I lost it. We won't go there. But the whole point is that each new reader must create an entirely new circuit. Sabra, if you were 4 or 3, there'd be nothing, be all these parts, beautiful but unconnected. Our job as human beings who become literate is to create a connected circuit out of older parts. But those parts are very essential to understand, and we do that in multiple ways, behavioral, imaging, genetic. But this one comes from the MIT lab just across the river. And you can see we have a fake magnet where the kids put their pet little animal, and okay, there is one tiny minute of deception where the animal gets its own scan. That's okay, but it helps them realize what's going on. And what we do is, and certainly not just us, but all around the country, what we're doing is like cognitive cartographers. We're building maps of what is involved. And in the beginning, it's the kitchen sink that's being thrown at our children. But slowly, that kitchen sink of cognitive, linguistic, and visual processes is making a pruned circuit. The parts of the circuit I'm going to go over only in about 5 minutes, so you have to move fast with me. But I need you to realize this is a beautiful, complex circuit. Now, we were talking at my table about one piece of how so many teachers in the 50s were using phonics, and then it's come back, and in between there was whole language. I need you to realize that we have a whole new way of thinking. Phonics is very important. It's a foundation. It's essential. But we need all the parts of the circuit addressed in how we really want to teach reading in our future. It begins with decoding and phonemes of the language. It is very important that, just as I use Sabra's brain, that area that represents letters and letter patterns really has maximum exposure to the patterns of whatever language you're teaching. We talk about spelling, but I want to give you one quick slide from Mary Anton Oldenburg, a principal that Lynn and I work with in Lexington, to show you why spelling is important still. This is Lexington. It's wonderful. It makes my point. I don't need to do anything more. But I have a more important point to make, and that's the essential aspect of vocabulary development in all our children. And do we have anybody here who's part of ROAR, Reach Out and Read, the Pediatrics group? I love them. They know so much. But I need you to realize we can do so much better than we are with understanding the differences that those kids come into the kindergarten door with in their language. This is not about economics, but I need you to realize that many of our children who come from underprivileged homes, whose parents don't have the time to give them all the language, literally walk in the door with 32 million less heard words. Now, you need to grapple with that. If I could, I have shown this slide so much that now people attribute it to me. Wolf's research. No, it's not my research. But the point is, this is the circuit part that is essential. And it's not being developed in so many of our kids. And we have to do better. I use roar as an example. I hope in various ways. Literally last week, I was in a teacher's group, and someone came up to me, and this was in Southern Illinois, and she said, heck with pediatricians. Why can't I do this in my church? Give out books instead of well visits and pediatricians. Why can't we just give a few books like well-reading children? Well, not well-reading, you know my views on babies and reading, but the most important thing we can do, and this is just so simple, is speak to our children and read to them. We don't need fancy anything. That's all plus. We need, however, human interaction in language and reading in all kinds of ways. And it can be with the computer, as I will tell you a little later about, through a very new invention by Cynthia Brazil Tinkerbooks. But the point is to read and be with your child in this area. Now, I wish I could talk to you about syntactic development, but I can't. Those of you who love Middlemarch, like I do, this is just an example of how important and unbelievably neglected in our school systems syntactic development is. It's part of that circuit. We need to be able to teach it and have it in our interventions. But I have to give a quick summary by saying, if we look at this circuit, it's a circuit with parts that we can do something about. But we need to look at it and be able to have our interventions and our ways of reading to incorporate the fullness of the complexity and not just one piece of it. Because if we look at what the brain does when it reads, it puts all these parts together by 280 milliseconds. And then it's the great Proustian moment. Or not. And here's the problem. Some of our children don't have these parts sufficiently developed, so they don't come together. There are asynchronies. There's simply a failure to be able to put the correct word meaning. And you probably don't know this, but there's a term called polysemy. I'll teach you 2 words today. Cerebral diversity and polysemy. Polysemy is the nature of many of our words that children learn. It means multiple meanings. But if a child doesn't know that a fish at the bank is not incongruous because it's a riverbank, if they have a set to understand these aspects of language, they have a better chance of being able to make the circuit work by 280 milliseconds so it can think. Now, this is very important for many aspects of our work because we want this extraordinarily activated brain to be able to go below the surface. Here's our surface, and here's when we go below the surface to what we are calling the deep reading skills. Now, my work has begun, and it probably will end, with a desire to completely reframe the conceptualization of dyslexia, which is so in air. But I use Philip Schultz's biography, or autobiography. Dyslexics are conditioned by their environments to blame only themselves for their learning difficulties. There's so many things we could say. We have to change it. We absolutely have to change it. Now, we have done work, this is work again with John Gabrielli's MIT Imaging Labs, to see some of these differences. And what you really see, here's some phoneme differences. Here are differences in the time. So you take that expert reading brain, you put it on its side, and what you see is that the right hemisphere is trying to do the work of the left. There's a gorgeous right hemisphere, but it slows it down. It's disadvantaged for the efficiency that the left hemisphere brings. So there's many aspects of why, and we want to take that knowledge and see if we can change our interventions. So what we are involved in is, at its very most basic, can we address the entirety of the reading circuit in how we teach children to read, especially children who are having difficulties putting that circuit together. So if you think about it, this will give you just a very quick view. Instead of thinking about whole language, which was involved in meanings and authentic literature, all this is good, but insufficient, or just an example, only phonics, only the sounds, you're leaving out so much. We need to bring them all together. And here's the key to simulating the brain. We need to do it at the same time. We don't need to teach roots and the idea of a prefix or any kind of affix in 4th grade. We don't need to have spelling on Friday that's completely dissimilar from the words they are reading. We need to imitate the brain. And that's really different from what and how we've taught. And as I said, Lynn Miller helped me design the RAVEL curriculum to do that in just the most fun way. This is something for children that is based on all of these kinds of principles. I'll only give you 2 of them. That's Mayor Mick, who teaches how words have multiple and interesting connections and associations. And this is my divine Ms. Mim. I know Bette Midler only a tiny bit. I want to ask her if I can say divine. I won't do it unless I have her permission. But this, just look at Miss Mim. She is our visual mnemonic for teaching that words can have as many meanings as Miss Mim has legs. Literally, some schools have their kids walk up to the intercom and say, "The Mim word of the day is." You can't believe how many ways you can teach our children an understanding of language that is fun and also what they really need to get that circuit to work. Now, National Institute for Child Health and Human Development, we have done 10 years of efficacy data. I'm only going to just show you 2 quick slides. It only took 10 years per slide, but it's okay. It's all you gave me. It's all your fault. No, I'm kidding. So, word attack. This gives us an idea. Can we change these children who are our most struggling? These are 2 years behind or more, our children in this study. And what we did was show different kinds of, or give them different kinds of intervention. I just need you to realize that we are en route to really changing them. We are not there. There's no silver bullet. And anybody who says they're just not true. But we are moving in the right direction, and we are making tremendous gains in it. Our work in genetics is with various researchers around the country, but especially with Jeff Gruen and Elena Gregorenko from Yale. And as I said, we're putting this together with what do we do about it in 5 years or 10 years, because it'll take a very long time. We had this conversation. We want to understand if we can take children who are coming from families where there may be a risk factor. I would like to change that word for dyslexia. And if that child seems to appear to be vulnerable, we want to put them in very important interventions before they walk in the school door. One of the biggest questions in the last 10 years was, what do we do and think about children who are now spending 6 to 13 hours a day on digital media during the important formation of the reading circuit years? And some of you realize some of you read the book. Joan, did you get to that part? You did. She Amazoned my book on Friday, got it Saturday, and was still working on it last night. Amazon Prime. Amazon Prime. That is one heck of a reader. But what Socrates was so worried about was he didn't want us to read. Why? Because he thought that our youth would have the illusion of truth without ever going below the surface. Now, fast forward to my children finishing their essay, and I say, have you learned about this? No problem, Mom. I know all about it. Oh, great. I Googled it. Now, this same thing happens every table there. So What does it mean to Google something? Usually means you get one page, and usually of that one page, you only read the first half page. What is the first half page adjudicated by? Popularity. Now, these are solvable issues, but they need to be raised. As Edward Tenner, who is a fantastic visionary in technology, says, it would be a shame if brilliant technology were to end up threatening the kind of intellect that produced it. Our question, how can we preserve the known advantages, the reading life as we know it, and add what they must have, which are the advantages of 21st century digital media? Some of the questions that we ask have to do with the characteristics that are being advantaged, or, in my opinion, disadvantaged. There's a set towards moving to the next stimulus, the next stimulus, the next. What does this do to attention? What does it do when we demand something immediate? Does this change the formation of a desire to go below the surface and think and focus about meaning? What can we do to ensure that our children learn to read whatever medium, deeply and critically? And the processes that we are most interested in developing are things like inference, analogical reasoning, critical analysis, contemplation. Now, we don't have even 4 minutes left, so I need you to realize that at the end of the day, it was Aristotle who said, all of this is about wisdom, the formation of wisdom. What is it about our generation that can be preserved, not our generation, our expert reading brain, that can be transferred? How can we think about it in ways that we know will ultimately cause all of us to think deeply? All of us have changed for the good and the ill. All of us. How many of you read poetry in the same way? We are on a great arc in our intellectual development. Reading plays a pivotal role. And one of the things that we're trying to understand is how can we add the new cognitive skills and preserve the ones that we treasure and want to protect. How can we instruct? Can we use, and this is a question that I am pursuing with Cynthia Brazil, and I'll tell you a little bit more in just 1 second. Can we use the advantages, the engagement, all this immediate knowledge of the digital mediums to address their own hypothesized weaknesses, particularly in the formation of deep reading? Can we use the thing itself to address its own weaknesses? That's us. Socrates wasn't right about reading. The same issues are, it's not that, it's us. How do we use our tools? Because they shape us according to their requirements, unless we ask them to do it differently, unless we instruct in the formation of our children to read differently. The final thing I will tell you in this potpourri of research is that we are now in 3 labs, our lab at Tufts, the lab of Cynthia Brazil and Nicholas Negroponte at the Media Lab, and Robin Morris in Georgia State University. We are involved in trying to understand whether our work can go beyond intervention in this country in dyslexia and our work in understanding the reading brain, and try to create a tablet based on best principles of technological innovation and engagement of children and best principles of what we are learning about the reading brain. Can we take a tablet? Can we learn iteration by iteration? Can we learn and take this tablet to children in the most remote regions of the world who have no opportunity to become literate? There are 100 million children who will never become literate today, who live in places where there are no schools or teachers. There are an additional 100 million who will never reach what we call the deep reading skills. What is our role? Now, here's Cynthia and a robot. We are not taking robots to Africa, but we are taking a tablet based on some of her work in technological innovation that has moved into literacy in the form of Tinker Books. And I hope, Cynthia, did you talk about Tinker Books this time last year? You did not. Totally new area of interactive reading. What we are trying to do is to create a tablet that can be used in these remote regions and in part employ the natural instinct of children to learn together. So we have begun, and we've only begun, and I have 1/2 minute left. Negative, I know. Negative 1/2 minute. We have just deployed in January our first tablet in Lake Wanchi. We are breathing fumes in terms of funding. We are writing every grant we possibly can. Tell anyone who might be interested in working on such a thing, we need their help because we have begun. The deployment went out to children who'd never, ever even seen anything technological. There is no electricity in these regions. There is nothing but huts. And they created a big hut for our children to go where there would be solar power for the tablets. And within 4 minutes, the first child turned their tablet on and said, "I got mine on. I'm a lion." We are not involved in a binary arc in our intellectual development. We are in a moment in time. In fact, Cynthia always calls it the moonshot moment. We are in a moonshot moment when there is a convergence of science, technology, education, and possibility. We need to take this moment and to look and see what we can do for the future of literacy. That is my charge, and I hope it's yours. Thank you.
As I mentioned before, if you have questions, staff will come in.
Okay, thank you. Have you looked at the anatomical changes associated with cortical blindness? No. There are those who have, but we are not. So whoever, I will talk to you afterwards, whoever wrote this question. It's very interesting. That's not in our lab. What is the long form of RAVEL? That's so funny. Okay, what does RAVEL stand for? I didn't actually say it, did I? It stands for reading automaticity through vocabulary, engagement, and orthography plus. It's the circuit. So basically, the circuit. Nobody wants to know. I assure you. Oh, how can we exponentially decrease the number of illiterate children? How can we do that? We are absolutely determined. If you would come to even one of the meetings that Cynthia and I have with our teens and see, we literally have people, as I said, we're just very much beginning to do this. We have people coming in to volunteer who are postdoc linguists who have done work in Africa, simply want to help us. There's so much goodwill around this project. Not funding. But we will move from, no matter what, how much funding we have. We have 3 grants in. We're speaking to everyone, that we can. But you know what? We're not going to say we're going to do this, but we are sure going to give it our best shot, And we are going to give our shoulders because other people are going to find out about it. And, you know, we're all in this together. Nothing could ever be more unifying than helping this happen. So we will do it. We will give our shoulders. That's what I know we'll do. That's why poor Obama and everybody else who's on live mics, huh? Children are now texting and not using correct spelling, even if they know the correct spelling. Is this problematic? You know, the answer is yes and no. That is really the truth. Yes and no. There are children who are never going to be good spellers, and they are going to be conquering the world too. But for those who can, I would like them to use part of their cortical space to appreciate the fact that spelling reflects a history of a word. Spelling is not just about phonemes and what, you know, a word like muscle, why in the world does it have a C? You know, that's the most insipid waste of energy to remember a C. Unless you've had a course that tells you that English is not phoneme only driven. It's morpho-phonemic from a linguistic standpoint. And that means we preserve the morphemes. So muscular and musculature are all part of this family, and you see it in muscle even if you don't hear it. So the history of our words is a piece of the beauty of our language, even if Mark Twain did not understand that. How does learning another language impact brain development? What about growing up bilingual? What a beautiful question. Oh, I love it. Okay, well, you know, the reality is there is so much work done on second language development that shows us that there are unique advantages in bilingualism in terms of flexible access and in terms of what we call meta-linguistic awareness. You know that your language is a language and that there are others, and you have all kinds of psychological, cognitive, and social consequences that come out of decentering yourself. Now, Goethe, this probably one of the most extraordinary convergences of science and literature that ever walked the earth, said, you will never learn your own language well until you learn a second. There is incredible difficulties that some children have to go through in challenges in being bilingual. A lot of my family and friends are from Switzerland, where they are trilingual, minimally. There's great research done in Canada where there's a lot of bilingualism. And of course, it is a complex story. But given the possibility of having a bilingual versus a unilingual brain, I would choose bilingual any time. Okay? Okay. Thank you so much. It was truly a pleasure. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.